Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the hospitality last night from Ray. We had a good piece of Irish beef and along with the lady from France, some nice French wine as well. Listening to one of the previous speakers talking about corporate power, I did just wonder if there was a future for the independents at all. So I'm going to try, if I can possibly, and make the case. We're a trade association representing about 280 independent abattoirs and processors in both red and white meat. We deal with the regulatory and political issues. You see there we have 4 veterinary advisors, one of whom is a barrister, to deal with our day-to-day conflicts with the regulators. Now, 1 second. So that's what the FSA think of the abattoir sector in the UK. It can get pretty confrontational, to say the very least. That slide was actually done by a friend of yours, a guy called Paddy Wall. We have a network, as I say, of 4 experienced senior vets. We advise on the legislation, we try and stay a step ahead, and we have 6 highly experienced lawyers representing members in potential prosecutions. Now that's up from 5 years ago. We used to have 1 solicitor, 1 veterinary advisor for roughly the same amount of members. Now we've got 4 senior vets and half a dozen lawyers. So you can guess that the regulatory environment over in the UK is, to say the least, quite strong. Now if you look at the attitude to industry, you might have seen in the papers Campylobacter in poultry has become a big political football over in the UK. And if you look at what the regulators say, the FSA in Ireland say the symptoms are usually self-limiting and complications are rare. I'd call that pretty balanced. I wouldn't say that was sort of scaring anybody. And if you look at New Zealand, the reason I put in New Zealand is they spend fortunes trying to combat Campylobacter over there over a period of years. So they're probably the preeminent country with regard to knowledge on Campylobacter. They usually recover in less than a week. In rare cases, it may cause long-term consequences, and it can be fatal. Unfortunately, deaths are rare. Then in the UK, it can kill you. In some cases, it'll affect you forever. Most of them survive, but not all. Now, I think that is bordering on scaremongering. And it questions to me whether the agency has become less of a science-based risk communicator and more of a lobby group. I don't know, I pose the question. But it's a little bit heavy on industry, we feel, and it does cause us some difficulty. Now, the independent sector, I represent plants in England and Wales. 50% of the cattle are slaughtered in our sector, 75% of sheep, 28% of pigs, 40% of poultry, and that's significantly up in the last 10 years against all expectations. And going back to the point that was made earlier by big corporate interests around the world, we have found the opposites happened in the slaughtering sector, mainly because there used to be a section of the industry which were large processors but weren't actually the major supplier to supermarkets, who therefore were secondary suppliers to the supermarkets through the big companies. They've all disappeared. And as they've disappeared, so their specialist work has dropped into the laps of our guys. Big changes. Most of our chaps used to be meat wholesalers years ago. They've tended to morph now much more into becoming service providers of the farming and food industry. So if you're a farming group, even a cooperative, that wants to get further up the food chain without owning an abattoir, which is a very sensible thing if you're dealing with the FSA day to day, then most of our men now are up for slaughtering, cutting, packing, delivering. You can run a meat business with literally a small chiller van and we can do the rest for you. And that has become an enormous change in our industry. And our customer base is export. The halal community obviously is huge and increasing. Catering institutional. High street butchers. I'm often asked what is the biggest problem or the biggest competition that high street butchers face, and I say it's farmers. And the reason is quite simple. High street rental rates in the UK are astronomical. Farmers can run a business with virtually no overheads, back on the farm, a small wagon, get our guys to do all the other work, and they are genuinely, whether it's farmers markets or direct selling to the consumer, they have become big threats to the high street butcher. Having said that, after a big downsizing in the numbers of high street butchers, those that are left tend to be extremely good at what they do. We've also seen a big increase in our abattoir owners and processor owners going back to retail, which is having a factory shop on the side of the abattoir or cutting operation. Again, it's low cost in terms of rent and rates, highly competitive and very, very popular, especially in the large conurbations. So here's the guy that I call my Star Ames member. He's a guy called George Boland Foods. I'll just tell you the short story about him. He had a small wholesaling business in Ferry Hill Station in the middle of the Durham coalfield, or as some people would say, the arsehole of the world. There really is no population anywhere close. Newcastle is 35 miles north, Teesside is 20 miles east, and Leeds would be 60, 70 miles south. And he decided he wanted something a bit better, so he bought a 25,000 square foot ex-refusion factory, turned it into a small abattoir, meat supermarket, etc. And 6 months later, they were doing some maintenance at the weekend, and a guy cut through a gas pipe and the whole thing burned down. But George had seen enough to know that he was onto something. So the insurers would only replace what was there, so he borrowed a couple of million and turned it into 45,000 square feet. Abattoir, processing plant, even all the way down to a restaurant serving now over 500 three-course lunches each day at £4.50. He retails through that single outlet 70 bodies of beef a week. And when you think the average number for a butcher shop is 2, and this is in the middle of nowhere, it is absolutely stunning. 300 pigs, 200 sheep, all sourced locally, crucially outside the supermarket spec. If you were to ask George how did he compete with supermarkets on prices, it's dead easy. I buy a commodity, a small heifer, a thick heifer, if it went into one of the big processors, would be discounted by 200 quid. So he said, I got a 200 quid start on them, so he said, I think I can work. And that's what he does. Interesting. Customer base is heavily working class with many on benefits. The working classes in the UK have always spent a bigger proportion of their income on meat. And the one area of people since the recession came that haven't had their income slashed is people on benefits. And you can walk in there on a Tuesday afternoon, which should be death alley for retailing, and see people having their cheap lunch and in there and walking out with trolleyfuls of meat. But it also serves the toffs. A lot of people coming up at the weekend from the south will go back with loads of stuff because it's far more cost effective than in the south. But he is a super guy. Anybody over in that part of the world should go and see it. Now you try serving the toffs. Dalesford Organic, it's owned by the JCB family. If you go past the works down the road here, you'll see the JCBs, the Bamford family. And they've got this fantastic farm shop in the Cotswolds. I've been there. But never have I seen so many employees selling so little. There's hundreds of them running around the bloody place. Lost millions for years. 5 years ago, it took a new chief executive, and it cut its losses from 42 million in 1 year to 8 million. And that's what comes of serving the toffs. My guy back up in County Durham employs 75 people and makes millions, serving the working classes. And that's a big, big lesson, because marketeers will always tell you you've got to go for the top of the market. It ain't true. And why? And I was stood in there one Friday afternoon, and I could see these people coming in the big Range Rovers, walking in, and I stopped one of them, and he got half a dozen fillets, and I said, what are you doing? He said, we're having a dinner party tonight. I said, are you back here next week? No, no, no. He said, I shan't be back here for a month. He said, the wife will be off to Tesco's to buy mince next week. So how can you have a business, running a business, selling the toss when they only want to see you once a month? So just interesting. There are some very successful businesses, you know, like this. But it just goes to show that you have to understand, just a dream and organics doesn't turn it into a successful business. We've actually seen organics in the last year or two taking a real hit in the UK. And their chief executive 2 weeks ago at their conference blamed the decision by Tesco's to delist them in 2008. Talk about kicking somebody on the floor. So in other words, the decline in Tesco's in the UK, decline in organics in the UK is all Tesco's fault. Quite apart from the fact the stuff is too expensive, it's too inconsistent, very few people want it. That was the real cause of the trouble. So what type of cattle do my members want? Coming a bit more onto your patch now. Put simply, anything the supermarkets don't. The big processors over in the UK, they all compete for the same thing, from 320 to 420 kilos. So why would our guys want to go and compete with that? There's only 40% of production meets their specifications, or at least 60% for us. You talked about Angus. Why would our guys be interested in Angus when the major retailers are already paying a premium anyway? Another reason why we can serve local food at significantly lower prices. I've got a bit of a strapline which says, local is the new organic at half the price. And that's what it's like in the UK. Local is taken off. You can deliver it locally with a sensible message. You don't even need a brand. And most of it is a damn sight better than any organic. So it's a complete variety of stuff that they want to suit their customer base. Horsegate, very interesting. Obviously prices went through the roof, and I know that you as producers are having a bit of a argy-bargy with your factories at the moment, but you know, you've got short memories, you chaps. It was only 12 months ago, your prices over here were pretty well identical to the UK. And you have to remember that the UK at the moment, even though we've dropped 8 and 90 pence a kilo, we are still the most expensive beef in Europe. You may be less than the UK, but you're not the cheapest beef in Europe. And what's caused the price rise in the UK, even though it's a bit soft at the minute, is the Horsegate scandal, which has forced processors to be much more careful about what they call British. And there is a demand in Britain for UK product which is over and above what I call normal market requirement, and it's been forced by the Horsegate thing. We've seen a significant return to local butchers and therefore direct sales. Something like 18–20% has lasted. As I say, local is the new organic. And then we had the dash for British in Tesco's and Crew. And I was at the NFU conference in February last year when Philip Clark, long gone now from Tesco, got up and said, we're going to buy all British. Marvellous. Price went through the roof, up to $4.20, $4.50 a kilo. 6 months later, they got tired of that. So Irish became the new British. Now, the great thing about that is, at least they acknowledge you now. Your stuff used to be on our shelves, and it was all British. Now it's Irish, and there's no harm with that. The thing that'll irk you a little bit, it's at the same price as British. So, if you're going to Tesco's abroad in England now, you'll find Irish advertised as Irish from our British and Irish farms. And that's perfectly fine. It's no problem, but it's a damn sight different to him saying 18 months ago we're only going to buy British. So that soon priced him out of the market. So, post-Horsegate, and I was interested to see that the Minister's representative had gone. 18 months on, we've had 3 huge inquiries. The last one was by Chris Elliott from Belfast University, and I won't tell you what he thought about the investigation. Millions spent on police investigations. So how many criminal charges that relate to the substitution of horse meat for beef are there currently in the system? How many would you think? You're too bloody sharp for me. 0. 18 months on, millions and millions gone. In inquiries, nothing. Just goes to show. So, end of June last year was pretty well a high water mark. I was sat listening to beef prices on a Friday, and we got Angus pushing towards £5 a kilo, ordinary cattle up as a $4.25, and there was just something happened. August, September last year, the retailers hit the brick wall. They really did. And we saw a pretty sustained drop over the next few months. Retailers fighting for market share, exports under pressure because of the way the currency was going, which has created a very soft domestic market, cheaper imports, yours as well, but I don't have any objection to that, and domestic demand slowing. Anyway, about 4 or 5 months ago, we were called to a summit at DEFRA with the Minister to discuss the whole slump in beef prices. All the great and the good were there, it was magic. And DEFRA's answer, the senior civil servant, gave a presentation. And what was his answer? Rare breeds. So that's what we got in the UK to save the beef industry. Rare breeds. You couldn't have made it up. At the end, the Minister asked if there were any questions. And I said, Minister, if the major retailers are selling nearly 2/3 of their beef as mince, why do we need a suckler herd? And he said, very good answer, Norman. Anybody else there, please? Thank you. Not a bloody clue. Biggest problem is there's nobody in DEFRA. No understanding the problem, even less an answer. Environmental issues. By the time you get past the environmental blob and the birds and the bees, there's nothing left. And I mean it, not an ounce of vision at all. So did it go too high? Probably did. We're now seeing more prime cuts on the open market, which the major retailers don't take. leaving the big processors with big lumps of meat that a year ago they were exporting, but now the way the currency's gone, the export market's very soft. Again, imported beef being cheaper. And I think the glass ceiling generally turned out to be iron. I think it's a long way back to the sorts of prices that that we had some few months ago. We're in a somewhat difficult position because when the beef was $4.25 a kilo, a lot of farmers are saying that without the brown envelope, it still didn't pay. We've seen a reduction in production over in the UK of 3 to 4% year on year for the last 7 years, and we're going to see the same for the next 7 years. We are looking at a significantly declining production. And as I say, critical mass for what? Mince production. We're seeing this drop. Slaughterings for 2014 are predicted to be somewhat higher, but really most of that is breeding heifers. And producers at the moment are delivering their own answer. They're running fast. Calf registrations in Wales, which is one of the main pools of store cattle for the English feeders, was down 8% last year in 1 year. 8%. I mean, that's some serious drop. So the supermarket woes. Some reference to it early on. Booker Foods. They were virtually bankrupt 13 years ago, and a guy called Charles Wilson took over as the CEO. And they've now got 130 million in the bank. And they deal solely with the independent sector. They serve over 500,000 independent businesses in the UK of all different sorts. They are global as well, they're over in India. But just look at what's happening, what the competition the supermarkets have got. Look at the increase in Booker's web sales from 2008, 109 million. Last year, 704 million. You know, you're seeing a massive change in what's happening over there. And after 60 years of supermarket expansion, growth is switching to other formats. In the last 5 years, out of home up 18%, convenience 29%, discount is up by 65%, online 98%, supermarkets only up by 8%. They're big figures. And you look at year-on-year growth, and this is bang up to date from Kantar World Panel. There's the growth figures for the main retailers, the top four, and Aldi and Lidl at the bottom. You just look at that. Year on year to October 2014, we're now seeing real and measurable decline in the big four. And you look at Aldi and Lidl, absolutely flying. They are sat in smaller units, more cost-effective units, lower rent and rates, and they try to concentrate on fewer products. If you go into an average Aldi, there's 1,250 products. How many products are in a similar size Tesco or Asda? 25,000. Can't be done. So the hard discounters are also starting to get market share within the red meat category as well. You can see down here, the total hard discounters from a standing start, they weren't in meat at all 3 or 4 years ago. Look at it already. They're starting to get up to really measurable amounts. And it's set to continue. A friend of mine's wife, they set up an Aldi near them in the Midlands 2 or 3 months ago. Her average weekly shop in Tesco's was 150 quid. And she went into Aldi, and the meat was the same price as anywhere else, and it was good meat. But for the same shop, it was 85 quid. That's a lot of money. Market capitalisation. Now, this is an interesting figure here, and it goes a bit to what the big companies controlling. Look at Tesco and Asda. Now, this was in February of this year, before the shares of the big four in the UK started falling through the floor. But just look how small they are. Amazon, founded only 20 years ago. Yeah, look at that. The Tesco, you know, there is a view, rightly or wrongly, and I don't know whether it's right or wrong, that the party's over for the big four supermarkets with their huge 55,000 square foot out-of-town models, really a thing of the past. That's what Mark Price and Waitrose thinks anyway. And he'll know more about it than me. And here's some interesting stuff. Capital expenditure from 2011 to 2013, 12 billion building new stores. 12 billion. With no operating profit and a smaller market share. So they've spent 12 billion over 3 years going backwards, and now they're all attacking the bottom line as well. You've only got to look in the papers, you know, another billion of discounts here, another 2 billion of discounts there, fighting each other to the death. It's not a pretty place. So, and he's gone, I was just going to compliment him. At least you have a supportive government. We don't. it's just a green lobby now. Agriculture in the UK has lost the argument to the environmentalists, the energy, wind farms and all that sort of stuff. There's not in England, Scotland or Wales, there is no vision at all for what production level should be. It's what the market determines. Owen Paterson, the last minute, who was deemed as a very good anti-green minister, but he didn't want any subsidies at all. And the farmers are telling us without subsidies, there's no industry. So I don't think that the big four supermarkets any longer provide the security for farmers to invest. And that came out of some of the comments made, I think, earlier on, that it is a bloody hard world. And as I've said, loyalty for that lot is worth about £1 a tonne. Not great. So I think the long-term exports are going to have to drive the market upwards to the increased worldwide demand, or the UK beef industry will decline much, much further as farmers vote with their feet. And I just wonder whether with the decline in production we're seeing in the UK across all the home nations, which contrasts with your production increase over here lately, whether there's will be a bigger opportunity for you into the UK as our business starts to decline. So the large processors, your friends. The Viande debacle was a salutary lesson for all who believe in farmer co-ops. It was the biggest agricultural co-op in the whole of Europe. And it came over and bought Grampian Country Foods and made a public statement they were going to teach Tesco's in the world how to treat proper processing businesses. They were going to sort Tesco's out. They lasted 4 years. They disappeared back to Europe. They said they were going back there to concentrate on their home business. No, they weren't. They were going back there to save it, and they couldn't even save that. There's virtually nothing left. You come into the UK to take on the major retailers, and I'll tell you what, it does take some doing. There's been enormous rationalisation within the larger processor sector. There's probably a bit more to go, especially in Scotland, where there's huge overcapacity. But in the main now, most of the dead wood in supplying supermarkets has been taken out. And they're all fighting to sell 2/3 of the carcass as mince in order that retailers can cut prices to survive. It looks a hard place to me. And the large processors are now faced with finding customers for these big lumps of meat that supermarkets don't want. It really is a heavy discounting world. So although the headline price to you looks a lot better in the UK, we've got the regional issues there as well. For instance, in the southwest, where most of the beef is grass-fed, prices are significantly lower where they're hard grain-fed in the north. And that's perfectly justifiable. But it's not that much different of a difference between your price here and our price over there. So what about our lot? They've increased market share over the last 10 years against all expectation. It's a combination of quality, price, flexibility in their operation, consumers becoming much more interested in where their meat comes from. Can I be sure? Yep, because I've been round. I do 50,000 miles a year in my car, and I see the investment going into our sector. All of these family businesses, the politicians will tell you there's nobody coming through these businesses, the younger generation doing other things. It's bollocks. Every last one of my members has a daughter or a son or a wife in the business, learning the trade. The next generation is there. Otherwise, why would the older generations be investing for them? Most of our abattoirs are slaughtering 2 or 3 times as much as what they did 8-10 years ago, as they take up the slack from the big processors. So just to finish, it's not BSE all over. That's just Dublin on a Saturday night. Thank you very much.